I'm Jennifer Parker, and I'm here to talk to you about the signs of that really crop up for people that tell them that something's wrong. So we're going to talk about red, yellow, and green flags for relationships. And in my work with intimate partner abuse survivors, we would often work to understand the patterns of coercive control and work to understand how things had shifted. And at some point, many times during a more humorous moment, they would say, I just wish they had something across the foreheads so that I would have known ahead of time because I couldn't see it then. And the truth of the matter is that oftentimes people do hide things. So I want to just acknowledge that before we get going on talking about the flags, the warning signs, because there are things that you can pick up on, and sometimes people really hide it until people become committed. So let's look ahead. So first I want to tell you about why I became interested first in intimate partner abuse and then in being able to identify the red flags about abuse. I was going through my own crisis of a divorce many, many years ago. And as often happens, I was really in a very, really growing from that experience, even though it was very, very painful. I was really looking at my life and like, what is going on? What happened during the past 11 years that we're ending up like this? And I had a bachelor's in psychology. And in order to find a good job, because I had two children and was going to be it was much more necessary for me to have a good job, I arranged to do a practicum through the social work school at the place that I was living. And they sent me to what they called the battered women's shelter at that time. I said, I don't know anything about domestic abuse, but you know what? I didn't think I did, but I really did. So what happened for me is just it really sparked my consciousness in terms of what I had gone through, what some of the things that led to my relationship disintegrating, but also kind of looking back on my past and my family. So I discovered that I really knew more than I did. And that was, as I said, a very big period of growth and empowerment for me. And I became passionate about empowering others and learning about how to do that. So through my training there, that sparked me to want to become a therapist. And when I did apply for graduate schools, I decided to only apply to those that could offer me specialized training in working with intimate partner abuse. So I ended up going to UW-Madison, the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and I did learn to do with abuser treatment and also work with survivors and with children. But ultimately, I decided to specialize in working with survivors. So during my career, I developed many handouts that developed into a group curriculum, and I used those materials in individual work as well as in group work. And ultimately decided, I like to write, and I really want to get what I was seeing in people being empowered by the work that I was doing. I wanted to get that to more people. So I ended up spending 10 years to write a book. Since I was busy with my practice, that's how long it took. And this picture shows me gifting my book, Coercive Relationships, Find the Answers You Seek, to the director of the same shelter that I actually started my journey on. So that's a little bit about me. Before we delve into the flags, red, yellow, and green, I want to talk to you about trusting your voice because that is so important. And there are so many things that in our culture inhibit people from trusting themselves. Sometimes we grow up in families where maybe we are encouraged not to trust ourselves. We're told, no, you don't feel that, or no, you're wrong, or you're crazy, sometimes in families. But essentially, there has also been traditionally a culture where females were distrusted more than males, and there's research that backs this up, that males can be assertive and deliver a talk and have that go over just fine. But if the female does the same type of thing, they are often perceived very differently. So that leads many women to distrust themselves. But I don't want to say that men don't learn to do that too. But there are different cultural reasons for women doing that. So in order, certainly we need to understand relationship red flags, but we also need to rebuild our trust if we've lost that in ourselves. And that's one of the injuries that I see when people are in abusive relationships or they come from a family that where there was some form of abuse or oppression going on. So you want to know your vulnerabilities. You know, if there are issues of self-esteem that make it harder for you to stand up for yourself, to say no to people, to state what you want, if you tend to doubt yourself, if somebody disagrees with you, if it's hard for you to hold your own with that disagreement, if somebody is saying, no, you're wrong, you know, we want to be open, but we also don't want to doubt ourselves. We want to be able to think through, is this, what's going on here? And what do I think about it? And what's important to me? And what are my needs? And the other thing that can happen is that empathy is misused. Empathy is a strength in relationships. But you can, what I call overcare, and many people call this codependency. But what that means is that you have more empathy for someone else, and maybe you're taking responsibility for caring for that person more than you do for even at the cost of yourself. And people who feel entitled to get what they want will misuse that. So some of those are some of the things that cause people to distrust themselves. And so it's important for you to work on those things if they're present for you, because otherwise, even if you see the red flags, you might doubt yourself, you might second guess, someone else might talk you out of it, someone might say that you're being too suspicious, those kinds of things. So that's why it's so important to pay attention to that. So let's move on to the red flags. I'm sure that this is not all the red flags that we could come up with. If we were talking in person, we could probably come up with even more, but these really capture some very important ones. So when you're interacting with someone, especially someone new, and if that person is really dominating the conversation, and every time you try to interject something about yourself, they kind of bring it back to themselves, so that they really don't show that much interest in you and your activities, what's important to you, that's a red flag. That if that's happening when you're first getting to know someone, it's not going to get better. Dominating your time. So if you are going out with that person, or even if this is a friend, if they want to dominate all your time, and even to the point of preventing you from having time with your friends or family, that is a huge red flag. If they're saying things like, you know, well, you must not care very much for yourself, you're really selfish when you want to do something other than spend time with them, that's a red flag. If they dismiss your concerns, anything that you might raise to talk about that you're concerned about, if they just dismiss it and label you negatively for doing it, maybe they tell you you're suspicious, you're too critical, you're not loving enough, you know, any of those things. Crazy, that's another one that I've heard, then that's a red flag. You want to say no to that. Ignoring things that you bring up, ignoring even sometimes bringing up a conversation and just not even responding, minimizing if your concerns, minimizing their behavior, deflecting their attention if you're talking about something. Like, for instance, well, what about you? You're not perfect either, you know, bringing up that kind of thing. Then you want to pay attention that you're not just automatically going into self-doubt, but instead you want to say, well, if you have a concern about that, we can talk about that later. This is what I want to talk about right now. And then, of course, blaming you for their behavior, for how it's affecting you, putting you down for that. Those are red flags. Denying that they made agreements, promises. It's one thing to forget. That this isn't about forgetting. It's about you think you have an agreement, you've made some arrangements for something, and then suddenly it's not happening, and they say, I didn't say that. So anytime that they're like saying that they denying, that's called gaslighting, of course. That is a huge red flag. And then it probably goes without saying, but I will say it, any type of physical abuse is a huge red flag. No matter whether they say, oh, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, that'll never happen again, I promise. No, you really need to, if somebody has given themselves permission to use physical abuse, do not trust that it's a one-time thing, because I've not known it to be a one-time thing. The next set of red flags has to do with observing their behavior with other people. That can be very important to pay attention to. For instance, do they get into conflicts with people and they act very aggressively about it? Now, I'm not talking about physical fights necessarily, although certainly it would cover that. But I'm just talking about, they get in disagreements and they're extremely aggressive in terms of how they respond. How do they treat their family members? That can be an important sign because it can tell you a couple of things. One is if they treat their family members with contempt, putting them down. It's one thing to identify things that you really have a problem with your mother or your father or whatever, sister or brother, but it's another to be contemptuous. That is so harmful. Contempt is a huge red flag. And also having contempt about their past relationships, even if they identify them as there being problems that would be understandable. But it's another thing to really be contemptuous and to treat them as if they're not inhuman. It's like dehumanizing people is a huge sign. If they have children, there are a couple things to be aware of. If they use harsh discipline, that is something that is a red flag. If they depend upon their children, kind of use them to fill their emotional needs, that is also a red flag. And then if at work or at other ways, if there's always some kind of villain going on in their lives, always some kind of drama, that's something to really beware of. And in addition, if they have depression or anxiety, any kind of mood disorder, or they have alcohol, drug abuse or usage, and they're blaming that on other people, or they're blaming that on, oh, this is what happened in my family, along with taking no responsibility for helping themselves with it, then that's a huge red flag. So all of these things, if you're seeing them happen, not necessarily with you, but with others, you can depend upon it. If you become very intimate with them, it's going to happen to you. Okay? Let's look at yellow flags. And you might wonder, well, how can something be in between red and green? But there are times when things happen, people act in ways that we're just not quite sure. So I want to give you some tools for, first of all, identifying some of those times, but also what to do if you're not sure. So if somebody tells you they love you before they know you really well, or doing what love bombing, if you know that term, just really overdoing the gifts and the compliments and the attention, and they want to always spend time with you, that can be you can kind of be on the fence about that. You might be concerned about it. You might also just love it, particularly if you're coming from a relationship that was not caring at all. It might seem as if that is wonderful. However, it can also mean that it's actually, you might decide that it's a red flag, it might verge into that, but it also just might be that this person is extremely insecure. And even if they don't become abusive, it might not be very much fun to be with them. So those are yellow flags. Also, talking about the family or past relationship experiences by blaming, not seeming to have a lot of awareness of their issues. That's something to look into. And then if they're forgetful a lot, or late all the time, forgetting their commitments, you can see that as a yellow flag as well. So what to do when you're not liking something that you see, or you're feeling uncertain about it. You want to trust yourself. You want to observe, and this is OSAL. OSAL is my acronym for this. You want to observe, you want to pay attention, and you want to set limits. Setting limits is so key to do early in a relationship, because if somebody is a person who would feel entitled to be abusive, use coercive control, setting limits, you're going to see right away that that's a problem for them. And you're not going to like how they handle that. But setting limits in a relationship is important if you're, with everybody really. In order to honor yourself as a person, you have to set limits. You have to have your own preferences sometimes. And so setting limits also test out the waters. It's like, is the other person okay with this? And then you want to ask questions that get to what is going on, helping you to understand where that person's coming from. So for instance, if that person seems to always forget things, asking some questions might lead to finding out that they have attention deficit disorder, or that they are on the autistic spectrum, or something like that. Asking about their need to, that they don't seem to have friends that they want to spend time with, and they want to always be with you, letting them know. Setting limits is, I think it's important for each of us to have other people that we're friends with and doing things with too, even if you're in a marital relationship. Can you tell me, what's that like for you when I say that, or asking about maybe their family background. You might uncover some things that tell you why they're insecure. It doesn't mean they'll necessarily be abusive. And then you want to listen, of course, and then evaluate. Give yourself time to do that. You may see things that you really like and decide that, this is okay. They are relationship material. Or you might decide, well, I could be a friend with this person, but I'm really, that really doesn't work for me in terms of a relationship. And then you might also just say no, have a big no to that. So always remember, you have the right to set limits and to ask questions and to decide for yourself whether this is a relationship that you want to have. Don't listen to anybody, and this is the huge red flag, if they're saying you're selfish or self-centered or any of that thing. Everybody has that right. Let's spend some time looking at green flags, because, it feels really good when we're in a relationship with somebody who really values us. And one of the ways they show that is by paying attention to you and finding whatever interests you is important to them too. Not necessarily that they're going to do the same thing, but they're going to support you in doing it. And they're also going to be mutual. They're going to be giving as well as receiving from you. It's going to be a balanced relationship, not necessarily each day, because relationships don't work that way, but overall it's going to feel balanced in terms of giving, receiving, and appreciating one another. They communicate respectfully, and that happens not just in the good times, but even if you have a difference of opinion. And if they do make a mistake, they apologize for that. And they listen to your feedback if you have concerns. They agree that they acknowledge that if they do have an issue and they work to improve that behavior. And they're consistent in terms of making any promises or, agreeing to work on something. They don't just kind of let go of it, but they're accountable for themselves. And they display consistent love or caring if it's the beginning of a relationship. They're caring, kind, and they're willing to give the benefit of the doubt. Now, earlier, I may have said that you want to be careful about giving the benefit of the doubt, but that's only if someone is not being mutual with you and also doing the same thing. Giving the benefit of the doubt in a relationship is a strength, as long as the relationship isn't one that feels entitled to get whatever they want. And so you want to be aware of any red flags so that you're not giving them the benefit of the doubt for being abusive, for neglecting you, or discounting you. Those kinds of things you don't give the benefit of the doubt about. So, do you want a relationship or not? That's something for you to decide. I think it's important to kind of check off the things on the green flag list. And also, chemistry is involved, right? Everybody who demonstrates green flag behavior isn't necessarily somebody that you're going to fall in love with or want to be with, and that's okay. So both of those things need to happen. However, just note that sometimes when we've become so used to red flag behavior, or if we've grown up with that, it may feel so familiar that we are kind of attracted to people and that we find it harder to be attracted to people with the green flag behavior. And if that's you, no shame, no judgment about that. There are good reasons why that is true for you. And I just encourage you to work with someone or work with books, whatever works for you. But of course, I'm a therapist, so I recommend therapy, but kind of looking at how to reacclimate yourself so that you're not continuing to get drawn to people who actually display behavior that isn't respectful. I'm including these slides for anybody who wants them, but I also am giving you the coercive control checklist, as well as a summary sheet of red, yellow, and green flags, so that you have that, which is a little bit easier than all these slides. So I just want to talk to you about the coercive control checklist a little bit, because it's important to be aware of these behaviors too. They can also add to the red flags that we talked about. And when I wrote my book, I had been using a checklist from another book called When Love Goes Wrong. And when I wrote my book, I couldn't contact anybody. I couldn't get a response from anybody about whether or not I could use theirs. And then I decided, well, I should just make my own, because really this needs to be updated. There are other things like technological abuse, for instance, that happen. So I drafted my own checklist, and I named the 12 forms of behavior for how they affect people. So, for instance, seduction, the first one, is an interesting one because that includes some of that like love bombing kind of behavior, things that, initially don't feel like it's a problem, but then it slides into a problem, like, like wanting to do everything for you, but then it can become control, coercive control. So each of them, I encourage you to look over those. It's fairly lengthy, both in terms of the checklist, but also I devote a little bit of time talking about how each one affects the person. And you may notice that of the 12, only 2 of them are physical. That is much of coercive control is mental abuse, emotional abuse. I even call it spiritual abuse. And research shows that emotional abuse should not be devalued or minimized, which frequently in our culture it has been, but it actually causes as much long-term harm as physical abuse, unless, of course, it's physical abuse that is causes mortal injury. I love this quote because it really underlines that it isn't just words, but it's about how you show up in a relationship. I want to be in a relationship where you telling me you love me is just a ceremonious validation of what you already show me. And I just want to underline that you want to know when you see things, if you see the red flags, if you see things that are concerning to you, believe them. Believe what they're showing you, that that's who they are. Very, very important. And again, we come back to that whole issue of trusting yourself. So this shows my book. I have a website. If you're interested in my book, I wrote it for survivors. I also find that therapists find it very useful because it helps them to understand from a survivor point of view. And also there are a lot of reflection opportunities in there that help survivors and that therapists can use. In addition, my website has some resources that you might also find helpful. For instance, I have blogs that I've been doing for years, so you might find some that you want to read. You can also subscribe to my blog because I write monthly ones. And if you do subscribe, you will receive an additional handout called Accountability Clues, which if you're in a relationship with someone who is abusive, it helps you to know whether or not their promises that they're going to change are really valid, that they're really changing. So I call it accountability clues. And then there's also podcasts that I've been interviewed on that give you other information. And so I invite you to look at my website. If you have any questions, please contact me or we can talk after this broadcast. Thank you very much for being with me today.